You arrive at dusk, as you always do. The wind slips through the broken stones of the high desert, carrying sand like the whispered breath of something buried. The air here never moves without memory. Not in this place. Not Hebrew. Not Aramaic. Something else. A language older than its own grammar. Sinew tightens in your hands, resisting you. This story does not wish to be told. You already know. The forgotten God wants to be remembered. You kneel near a crumbled altar older than Moab itself, surrounded by shattered tablets whose lettering has not just faded, but been peeled away, as though someone feared even the imprint of a name. That's what you say now, not out loud, but through breath, through instinct. Those who join this archive leave signs that they've heard. Beneath your hands, the stones hum with the presence of a word no longer spoken, a name forbidden not by law, but by consensus of trembling hearts. There is no ceremony to enter the archive. There is only need, and yours is strong tonight. You unroll a decaying parchment wrapped in goat sinew, marked only by the faint curl of a spiral. You and I, we're not researchers, we're grave robbers of the divine. The symbol of anchoring, Chemosh was not a god of the heavens. He pulled the divine downward, into the earth, into the bones, into the blood. His temples were not windows to the sky. They were cisterns of oaths and silence, shrines that swallowed sound. So you whisper into the cold, into the dust, into the name that should not survive. Chemosh saved his people, he wrote, in ancient Moabite script, as though someone tore it in the moment of writing. The last word. But later copies would translate it falsely, some replacing Chemosh's name with God, others omitting him entirely. It's not. The glyphs are too old. The ink. Burnt copper and blood. It tells of a sacred city near Mount Nebo, where Chemosh's priests once convened in silence, where rituals were done with no witnesses, where no songs were sung, only breathing, only fire. One line of the stele is deliberately damaged, hammered, scraped. Scholars claim erosion, but the strike marks are too precise. They did not want to forget the sentence. Not words, timelines. What was, what could have been, what was traded away. Chemosh, a god no longer worshipped, not because he was overthrown, but because he was buried as a threat. Moab trembled before Israel's march, and its king Balak summoned the sorcerer Balaam to curse the Israelites. But in secret, some scholars whisper, Balak was not merely defending his land. He was protecting the memory of a covenant far older, God whose voice was not kind but clear, whose promises were not peaceful but binding, and whose gift was not life but victory at a cost. One who honored blood above all and required it in kind. Not just blood spilled in battle, but blood given willingly. You know the stories of kings who sacrificed sons, of priests who slit their own throats to appease him. But what they don't say is this, not erased, but hidden under centuries of edited memory. When the scribes wrote of Yahweh's wrath, they did not merely describe conquest. They described the spiritual slaughter of other names. Chemosh's was the one that most refused to die. The stones do not answer, but they lean, like subscribe, and leave your offering below this altar. This is not entertainment. This is not a lesson. This is uncovering. You remember the name, so do the stones. Chemosh, the god of Moab, of rage and fire and red-stained altars. It begins, as all these things do, not with worship, but with fear. His name is first mentioned in the book of Numbers, but not as a subject. You brush sand away from a basalt fragment, revealing a single glyph, 3 inverted triangles pointing into the ground. When Meshah, king of Moab, carved the famous Meshah stele in the 9th century BCE, he credited Chemosh for his rebellion against Israel. They wanted to forget the subject. You look now to a lesser-known document, the Ziph fragment, unearthed in the 1800s and dismissed as a forgery. This fragment ends mid-sentence. A sudden slash across the hide. Alam Kem. You repeat it slowly. The breath of Chemosh, a right lost to every tongue but yours. Now, because you have said it. History tells you Chemosh was a war god, nothing more. But the stones say otherwise. They tell of a contractual deity, a divine lawyer. They were never commanded to. They chose to. Because Chemosh did not force. He promised. And for some, that was enough. You touch another tablet. This one is blank, but but your fingers twitch, and then it's not. Faint lines form in dust. Some gods fade because no one remembers them. Chemosh fades because everyone agreed not to. There are gods forgotten by time, and then there are gods buried by agreement. This is not a matter of conquest. This is a matter of pact. And you now are an oathbreaker. Now, let's get started with today's story. You walk now through a vision, not memory, not dream, but a reconstruction. The sand beneath your feet darkens to bronze as you approach the heart of ancient Moab. Cities rise where history insists none stood. Their foundations built of salt and copper, pulsing with the echoes of a theology few dared to preserve. The flames that crown each tower are not symbolic. They are living, eternal, untouched by wind. The mouth of the goat, the mouth of the child, the mouth of the flame, the mouth of the god, the mouth of the priest, the mouth of the people, and finally, the mouth of silence. These are the crowns of Chemosh, lit once and never extinguished. You do not need to speak. The silence here is total, yet every step you take is understood. Flame clings to the walls like fungus. The air tastes metallic, bitter, but you find it here, chiseled into the underside of the altar. Bala, Z. You mistook Chemosh's silence for mercy. His reign lasted 3 seasons. In that time, the rain stopped, the soil soured, and the goats birthed only stillborns. The priests offered blood, more and more, but Chemosh remained quiet. And then you see it. The altar of Chemosh, still warm after all these centuries. Carved from a single block of black limestone, it bears no inscriptions, only a ring of iron fused into its surface. A restraint, perhaps, or a symbol of containment. They say he burned from within, walked out into the desert, and became the ash shepherd, gathering no flocks but bones. They say he still roams beneath the dunes, humming the 7 names of Chemosh. Only the 6th is known. It describes the fire test, yes, but also something deeper, a meditation. Performed at midnight on the winter solstice, where the priest places embers on their tongue and chants Zekhem, a word that blisters flesh but reveals visions. It is not clear whether the visions come from Chemosh or from within. In Moab, words were not trusted. Only fire spoke truth. No head could wear it for long. But that was the point. It was worn not to rule, but to burn. The king who placed it upon his brow would feel Chemosh's will in the agony that followed. Only those who endured the trial would hear the gods' whispers and know what tribute was required. It was here that kings sat not on thrones, but on stones hollowed by blood. Here, beneath the acacia branches carved into the temple's eaves, priests of Chemosh lit sacrifices not with chants, but with breath held. Knives unsheathed and eyes closed to the sky. Worship was not celebration, it was a contract, each offering a clause, each scream a seal. The fire tells you stories. One of them begins in Kir Hareseth, Moab's sacred capital. You arrive at the Temple of 7 Mouths, so named not for its architecture, but for its rituals. You do not pass through doors, you descend. Inside, the light shifts. It no longer dances, it judges. Atop it rests the crown of Moab, not a crown of gold, but of burning cedar branches wrapped in copper filigree. One king did not remove the crown in time. His name has been scratched from every stele. Even in the Mesher records, a line is left conspicuously blank. Then Balazia took the crown once more and walked to the altar himself. He did not die, not in the way men understand death. Place your hand on the crown. It's cold, but your fingertips ache. The ritual called Tak Salmesh is detailed in the Copper Codex of Daban, one of the few sacred texts preserved only in fragments and forbidden to be copied. You shudder, knowing that somewhere, perhaps in exile, there are those who still perform it. The theological mystery lies here. Why was Chemosh silent during certain sacrifices? Was it rejection, or was silence itself the answer? Some Moabite mystics believed silence from Chemosh was a sign of covenant fulfilled, not denial. The absence of voice meant his presence was already underway. This, of course, terrified the scribes of Judah. He takes his heir, the crown prince, and offers him on the wall to Chemosh, not in secret, not in shame, but in declaration, the scripture says. There was great wrath against Israel. In 2 Kings 3, the infamous tale of Messiah sacrificing his son unfolds. Israel, Judah, and Edom besieged Moab. Messiah, king of Moab, loses. And then, no one agrees on what that meant. Others say the gods, even Yahweh, turned in disgust. But the truth whispered by forgotten scribes is darker still. The stone is scorched in a way no natural fire could cause. Beneath its char, faint spirals emerge, not drawn, but grown, as if the mineral itself twisted in response to what it had seen. Some say the sight enraged the Moabite army into a frenzy. They say Chemosh answered, and they say the wrath was not Israel's, but his. You examine a shard from that very altar wall, once part of the battlements where the sacrifice occurred. You realize something now. A burning crown on the head of a mortal god-king is not homage, it is fusion. The king did not serve Chemosh, became his avatar. Chemosh's rites were not erased by fire, they were fire. The rituals did not commemorate history, they rewrote it. This is not heresy, it is design. You reach for the fire. For a moment, just one, it does not burn. You arrive at the Valley of Salt, though no map names it that way anymore. Today, it's just an arid stretch of silence between ancient Dibon and the sun-split cliffs of the Arnon Gorge. But you know better. You followed the scorched veins of ancient cartographers, those who once inked borders not in lines, but in blood. And here, where the earth turns gray beneath your feet, and the sky feels unusually low, you feel the whisper of forgotten packs pressing against your temples. The legend says the king of Moab, desperate to save the line of Dibon from extinction after years of famine and war, brought his bloodline, not just his son, but his daughter, his cousins, his half-siblings, and offered them in the silent formation, a circle broken only at the south. That's where the seventh knelt, the living seal, penchant, a remnant of oath. But in the obsidian commentary, an obscure Babylonian tablet that references foreign cults during Nebuchadnezzar's reign, there is a line that matches the Moabite myth. A Western king gave 7 kin to his god, and from it a voice began to bleed from the dust. Why was the 7th spared? The ash pattern codex offers no answer. It's only a symbol etched repeatedly, a circle with a spiral emerging downward from its center. Moabite mystics say it is the mark of internal binding, a god not anchored in temples but in flesh. Chemosh, unlike other gods, did not dwell in high places, implanted himself in the living. He was not external. Their blood was not spilled, but their name was erased, absorbed into Chemosh. For a moment, the heat returns, as if the ritual never ended, only paused. Beneath your touch, the stone softens, breathes. You feel it exhale the names that were once given here. Names no historian will ever know. A priest, mouth stitched shut with copper wire, raises a blade of black bronze. No sound escapes either of them, but the boy smiles. A glyph used only once, in the margins of a Qumran cave parchment, and dismissed as a scribal error. You touch it. It crumbles into dust, and the dust does not fall. It rises, swirling around your head. You hear nothing. But it appears again here, on a hidden wall. It is the mark of the pact forged, not between man and God, but between selves and shadows. The 2 thumbs glyph represents duality within unity. The king who sacrifices his son is not severing lineage. He is dividing the soul, offering the half that still remembers. Not in defiance, in understanding. This was not a murder. This was a contract. Names never written down, only whispered into the fire as they died. That was the rule, to be remembered but never recorded. 7 bodies, 7 breaths, each offered not with fear, but with vows. This is where it happened, sacrifice that rewrote Moab's covenant with its god. You walk slowly, as the valley has no ruins, no markers, no shrine. It is barren by choice. For a ritual so potent it might not be contained even by stone, the priests of Chemosh selected a place already cursed by time. The salt here is not from the sea, but from old blood, dried to powder, spilled so often that the ground can no longer feed anything except memory. That the 7th child, the witness, never died. When you kneel, you hear it, not a voice, a pulse. Rhythmic, hungry. In the hill villages beyond the Jordan, they whisper of the Moabite ghost, a man with no shadow, who hums in a language no one speaks, and whose blood never dries when cut. They say he remembers things no one taught him. Names of gods, smells of burnt copper, dreams of screaming stones. A walking remnant of that ancient pact. The ancient scroll known only as the ash-patterned codex, lost for centuries and dismissed as apocryphal even among Moabite scholars, describes the great offering of binding, a ritual not to request favor, but to forge eternal debt. The seventh was left alive. They were to carry the weight. A witness. A living scroll. You now see it. 7 indentations in the rock, too symmetrical to be erosion. Some scholars believe this tale symbolic, an allegory for generational trauma, or national sacrifice. The voice. That's what you hear now. A theological mystery shrouds this ritual. Why would a god so fierce desire not just blood, but memory? He was resident. You reach out to the center of the stone ring and press your hand against the rock. Then a shiver. A vision, perhaps. You see a boy, no older than 10, eyes ash-colored, standing at the center of a valley, and now you realize the heretical symbol carved beneath that vision, a hand with 2 thumbs. That is Chemosh's worship, a splitting, and the forbidden belief that such a split can survive. That a person can live as half human, half sacrifice. There are rumors. You walk now toward the edge of the valley and find an artifact buried in a cleft of stone, a clay pendant shaped like a spiral breaking into threads. Then, a whisper, a name you don't know, a name you wish you hadn't learned. You turn. The valley has shifted behind you. The circle of indentations is gone. Only 7 mounds remain, and in the center, a mirror. You see yourself, but your eyes are ash-colored now. You find her beneath the basalt overhangs of Mount Pisgah, where the cliffs pour shadow over the earth like dried ink. They call her forgotten, but the rocks remember her blood. Her cave is unreachable by trail, concealed by dead vines that do not grow or rot. You only see it now because the path has let you, because something wishes you to enter. You do not knock. You breathe once, and the entrance opens. Inside, the cave tastes of rust and forgotten myrrh. It is not wide, but deep, spiraling downward, like everything in Moab's god lore. You descend with palms to the wall, fingertips grazing symbols etched not by chisel, but by nail and tooth. The further you go, the fainter the light becomes. Not because it fades, but because the darkness here is hungry, swallows even memory. At the bottom, there is no altar, no shrine, it's only her. The inscription is brief. The mouthless one saw the last breath of Chemosh and buried it beneath her jaw. Then it unfurls. Not outward, but inward, revealing no words, no runes, only the faint echo of breath that was never released. And then the whisper forms, not in your ear, but in your memory, as if you'd known it once. She sits cross-legged on a slab of red granite, arms wrapped around herself in eternal mourning. Saw the black-robed scribes pouring ink over scrolls. Saw a temple collapse, not from war, but from neglect. And she saw something worse, a god unmourned. A god whose forgetting was not a loss, but a sentence, her hair fused with dust, her eyes open and blind, her mouth closed, sealed not by force, but by absence. She has no tongue, only the cavity remains. And in that hollow, a folded scrap of bronze curled like a withered leaf. Or historical, you're no longer in the realm of academics, we're in the cave. And the bronze leaf pulses with something that is not heat. It feels like waiting. You do not touch it yet. She would enter a trance at the new moon, covered in ash, surrounded by empty jars. The gods, it was said, would speak into the emptiness. But one night, Chemosh came not as voice, but as wind. He entered her lungs and showed her the end of his name, a vision too sacred to pass on. This is the oracle of Moab, unnamed in scripture, but mentioned once in a Canaanite tablet preserved by fire in Ugarit. Scholars dispute its meaning. Was it poetic? The Ashen Commentary, an uncanonized scroll found in a Phoenician shipwreck, speaks of an oracle who foretold the death of gods. So she bit through her tongue, stored the vision in metal. You lift the leaf now. It resists, like skin. The oracle saw Chemoshi's erasure. You feel your mouth go dry. The ritual preserved in this cave is called Shemelef, the silence of the first name, performed once by those who carried unbearable visions. It was a sacred self-mutilation, not to kill the voice, but to trap it. Preserved not by time, but by meaning. Her very stillness is a prayer against forgetting. By removing the tongue, the words become permanent within the soul, unable to escape, unable to fade. In Moabite heresy, such oracles were not prophets, but vessels, living tombs of prophecy. You begin to understand why she remains here, not dead, not alive. And that is the theological dilemma she exposes. What happens when a god is seen but not believed? It is the sigil of Teshtor, meaning to remember by pain. The air thickens. You try to exhale, but your breath resists. As if your lungs have remembered something your mind cannot yet translate. It's only referenced in one known place. The margins of the now-lost scroll of dust. According to rumor, it was a belief held by some Chemosh devotees that pain, not language, was the true form of memory. That words distort, but pain preserves. When the vision of a deity is too true, too sharp to be shared, does silence protect the world? Or does it doom it? But her mouth is no longer empty. It was clarity. You touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth. What if you had to choose? You look again to the oracle. New detail emerges. Carved above her a symbol rarely mentioned even in cursed texts. The double spiral crossed by a single bar. So the oracle's self-mutilation was not madness. You step back, the leaf of bronze still trembling in your hands. You feel it in your gums, your teeth, your spine. It is not the voice of Chemosh. It is the space where his voice used to be. Then a low hum. Not sound, but pressure. Ripples through the cave. You now see the second heresy, that Chemosh did not fall from worship. He left of his own accord. You leave the cave with the bronze leaf folded again, pressing into your palm like a promise. The oracle does not move. You climb now. Stone staircase cuts into the side of Mount Ataurus like a scar. Winding, endless, each step shallow, worn, and slightly misaligned. It isn't fatigue that slows you, but awareness. Each step bears a number, carved not in sequence, but in a spiraling script that demands your gaze twist with it. At the time you reach the 17th step, your perception shifts. The ascent is no longer physical. You climb through pattern. This is the temple of 360 steps. It no longer appears on any map. Even in Moab's own chronicles, it is referenced only obliquely. The place where fire does not climb but waits. A whisper trails along the wind, not spoken but implied. You recognize it. It's a mark of Ishbal, the seer who turned backward. A cultic figure said to have walked the 360 and descended blind, claiming Chemosh had inverted his spirit to show him the god's true face. The scroll of dust. Long thought lost the story of Ashketh. The blind priest who clawed his own scriptures into this very mountain with fire chalk and ash ink ends here. Legend says he placed his hand on the stone to call Chemosh, not to ask, but to accuse. He demanded why the god remained silent after Moab's fall, and even in heretical circles. Hints that Ishbal al-O emerged from the temple with a tongue split like a lizard S, and a second shadow cast forward. It is not in any language you know, yet you feel each syllable press against your ribs, like reversed breath. That was the first warning, but not from exertion, from recognition. This step is carved with a theological impossibility. The reverse tetragrammaton, cursed symbol composed of Yahweh's sacred name spelled not backward, but in inverted sequence, topologically inside. He did not oppose. He nullified. His theology was not rebellion. It was subtraction. Your vision tightens. Your ears ring. Feel as though you've left not time, but sequence. Only two vertical slashes on either side, like the remnants of an unspoken glyph. You step through. It was said that Chemosh's final priesthood used this to negate covenant, to deny divine exclusivity. You do not pause. You cannot. For every moment you linger, the steps begin to shift beneath you.
Adding structure.
In meaning, you are the mask. You see through its memory. A priest kneeling, a fire ignited by breath alone, a voice speaking from beneath the altar. Not loud, not fierce. Patient. One is made of bronze, one of bone, one of ash hardened into shell. These are the faces of prayer, relics of a forgotten practice where Moabite priests wore false faces to speak truths no human mouth could shape. The belief that only when identity is obscured can revelation occur? A narrow recess in the stone, blackened by soot, filled with finger bones. But the cost? The cost was exile from all other truths. Not human, not animal, something between. Above it, a symbol. 3 concentric rings interrupted by a jagged break, a sign of incompletion. It is the mark of prayers cut short, sacrifices made, but not received. A warning that Chemosh's favor was never transactional. He did not take, he measured. The 71st step bears a glyph, an open eye above a coiled serpent. Theological scholars dismissed it as poetic metaphor. The air thickens with meaning. The 240th step rings beneath your foot like bronze. It sings, though no wind touches it. The resonance vibrates up your spine. You understand now. Each step is an invocation. Every pilgrim who ever climbed added to the temple's memory. This staircase remembers. You are now certain it was not. At the 180th step, the midpoint, you encounter the first offering pit. You continue. The climb intensifies in gravity, not in slope. Step 300. A plaque of obsidian protrudes. It bears no words, only a single handprint fused into the glass. No answer came, only the handprint, fused forever. At step 340, your legs tremble. That symbol has not survived in any Judeo-Christian document. But here, it pulses faintly, carved with hands long dead. You feel your breath catch. This is the heretical secret few dared to write. Chemosh did not see himself as rival to Yahweh, and now you reach the final step. The 360th, before you stands a doorway. Square, black, marked by no lintel or inscription. The chamber inside is lightless, yet you see, not with eyes. With memory, you are standing in a circular chamber. Its floor is etched with spirals, its walls lined with shallow alcoves, each holding a mouthless mask. One mask calls to you. It hums, it weeps. You take it. As you place it before your face, something shifts, not around you. Within, the room blurs. You are not wearing the mask. And then, the true unsolved mystery of Chemosh unfolds. He was not forgotten because of defeat. He was forgotten because his rituals worked. They fulfilled their promises, and they bent the divine. To serve Chemosh was to sever oneself from every other god. You remove the mask, the room vanishes. You stand once more at the 360th step. Below you, the staircase leads back into history, but you are no longer at its summit. You're a part of its spiral. You walk now among records. It's not scrolls, not tablets, but the living marrow of forgotten genealogies. The kind etched not on parchment, but in bone, in blood, in repetition across generations who dared not write but whispered. The Moabite kings, scribes insist, left sparse evidence of their succession. But you now understand why. You hold the answer in the silence between one name and the next. There are gaps, not accidents, but erasures. You stand in the ruins of Nebokareth, a city once devoted entirely to birth records, temple adoptions, and the tracing of tribal lines. And it was here that his most terrible title emerged, the devourer of lineages. Not as metaphor, as fact. Nothing remains but fragmented brick and a thin lattice of obsidian flakes embedded in the earth. Flakes shaped like teeth. You kneel to examine them, and one presses back. It is not a fragment. It is a mauler, human in shape, but far too long. Beneath the collapsed roof, you find carvings on black basalt, each inscribed with pairs of names, child and parent. But at random intervals, there are deep gouges. It's not just scratched out, but surgically extracted. The grooves are too clean. The stone was removed while still soft, still wet. His seed is Chemosh's. That a barren bloodline was not a tragedy, but a gift. Some families willingly ended themselves, believing their souls would become voices within the god. Not angels, not spirits, but tools. It was not performed at birth, but at death. When a family wished to offer a soul not to heaven, but into Chemos's memory. Not for blessing, not for reunion, but for removal. The soul would be drawn downward into the god's archive, stripped of name, image, and destiny, a lineage devoured at its terminus. This place was sacred to Chemosh, not as a temple of fire, but as a womb of legacy. This is the mark of Erasure, a high priest known only through a single mention in an Assyrian court record, where he was condemned for interfering with the genealogies of tribute. He allegedly presented a record in which Moabite lines simply ceased to exist, and claimed this was a spiritual triumph. If legacy is the heartbeat of civilization, then Chemos's worship demanded a reversal of all purpose. Yet a single tile remains. The image of a child with no face, standing beneath a tree that bleeds downward. Its roots dripping into the mouth of a god without a head. Not multiplication, not remembrance, but subtraction. Faith not in becoming, but in unbecoming. The child's erasure was not death, but ascent downward, into utility, into sacred repurposing, that the dust occasionally settles into characters unknown, that bones found in ancient tombs bear engraved letters inside the marrow. You enter what remains of the Hall of Echoing Names, that entire family lines were traded to him in exchange for omens, victories, or silence. He did not ask for obedience. He asked for futures. Bloodlines extinguished before they could sprout. You whisper one of the surviving name pairs. Yoshak, son of Malo. Your breath catches. Your tongue goes numb. There is power in unfinished trees. The forbidden ritual preserved here was known as arithema, or binding down the root. But it did not stop there. In some accounts, most notably in a forbidden text referred to as the Nameless Ledger, it said that Chemosh accepted these devotions as currency. The ledger, of course, has never been found, only fragments. But one passage remains carved into a funerary urn uncovered near Al-Karak. The childless king is not cursed, but blessed. And this is the heretical belief that shattered Chemosh's worship, that infertility was not misfortune, but proof of covenant. You now understand why entire branches of Moabite ancestry simply vanish from the record. They were not forgotten. They were fed. Theologically, this introduces a terrifying dilemma, some believed. In the shadow archive of Allel, you find a clay seal imprinted with 3 glyphs: the inverted tree, the downward arrow, and the closed eye. The Assyrians executed him, but they could not erase the symbol. You now hold that symbol. It is pressed into your palm like an invisible wound. You follow it to the edge of the ruin where a mosaic once stood, now shattered. No one has ever decoded this image in full. But now, you feel its truth. It is not metaphor. It is memory. Chemosh did not only destroy, he absorbed. His priests taught that by offering an heir, the parent would live eternally as an echo within the god's breath. And here lies the final, unsolved mystery. If Chemosh devoured names, where did they go? Some claim the wind in Moab sometimes speaks in syllables that no tribe remembers. You look again at the obsidian molar. You bring it to your ear. You hear not a voice, but a question. Whose name would you give? You do not answer. But the tooth crumbles, and your palm is stained with ash. There is no longer a record of you on the basalt tablets. It's not even a mark. You see it long before you reach it. The mountain glints even under moonlight, an unnatural shimmer, too smooth to be stone, too fractured to be volcanic. It rises like a blade plunged into the land, its slopes sharp, its summit flat, like a ritual platform forgotten by heaven. No vegetation dares creep along its base. Even lichen recoils. It is cold, but pulses faintly, as if something beneath is still breathing, still hungry. The wind here doesn't howl. It hisses, like breath dragged through teeth. Locals call it Chemosh, though maps label it only as a geological anomaly. Theories abound. Volcanic glass, a collapsed meteorite, obsidian fused by lightning. But you know better. A paradox, for the mountain is a burning place, but not with flame, with memory. The Moabites believed that on the new moon, when the world was least seen by the gods of heaven, Chemosh would rise from beneath Chemosh to taste memory, to inhale what had been lost. Others think it was the name Chemosh gave himself at Chemosh, the unlit name, a name meant not to be spoken but inhaled, only discoloration. and at its center, a hole. Not a vent, a mouth. The opening of Zaphon. You've traced its mention not through science, but through silence. The deliberate omissions in Moabite scripture, the hymns without melody, the maps that curve around this mountain like a river skirting a corpse, or the underworld, but in a folded realm. Beneath the mountain, not a place, a layer, accessible only when memory becomes vapor. Worshippers would stand at the hole, burn no incense, chant no praise, but instead breathe in their own memories, and then exhale them into the darkness. You arrive at its edge and place your hand upon its surface. The ritual once performed here was known as Zaphonketh, the offering without fire. This was not a ritual of blood. It smells of copper, old wine, and windless spaces. You reach into your mind, a memory, something precious, a face, perhaps, a song. The voice of someone who once called you by a name that is no longer yours. Hollowed. The wind shifts around the mouth, forming symbols from dust and echo, a shape like a reversed flame curling inward, ending not in light but in curve. You recognize them, not animal, human, but melted at the edges, as if memory itself has been scorched from the marrow. A copper medallion rests beside them. Its surface bears 3 punctures in the shape of a triangle, and when you touch it, your ears ring with a memory not your own, a chant of low, throaty syllables, repeating the same word again and again. It was a ritual of smoke. Others suggest it was a site of early psychological ritual, a place where forgetting became salvation. But they missed the true danger. What if forgetting summons? You begin to climb. The slope is steep, but not unstable. Your hands scrape against the glass-like surface, and small flakes peel away, not like rock, but like dried scabs. The worshipper who ascended Har Chemosh left their soul in vapor and descended as something else. The further you ascend, the harder it becomes to breathe, not from effort but from absence. The air grows less, not thinner, as if the mountain consumes oxygen or forgets to exhale. Halfway up, you pass a depression in the stone, filled with gray dust and twisted bone shards. You see a figure standing opposite you across the stone ring, robed in gray. No face, only breath. It does not move. It does not need to. It remembers you. Shilka. Shilka. No one knows what it means. Some suggest it's the name of a forgotten priest. You continue the climb. Near the summit, the stone flattens into a broad, circular platform. Its edges are scorched, but there are no burn marks. The forbidden belief is known only through fragments of the glass psalms. A lost Moabite text once quoted in a 3rd century Gnostic scroll was that Chemosh did not dwell in the sky. To forget was the sacrifice. The priest did not carry fire. He carried absence. And if Chemosh accepted your offering, if the memory you gave was worthy, the smoke would not rise. It would sink. You lean over the mouth of the mountain. You exhale. The smoke does not drift upward. It is taken. Your heart clenches. You do not know what you gave. You only know it's gone. You feel lighter, and that's when you feel it. Not presence, but alignment. You are now in the same layer, just for a moment. Theological scholars argue over this mountain. Some call it a myth. The act of forgetting is not escape. It is invitation. The mountain, according to one forbidden tradition, is the nostril of the god. Chemosh did not need temples. He needed breath, needed to enter the body, not possessed, justed. You stagger back from the mouth. The dust swirls tighter now. You turn to descend, but the steps you climbed are gone. The mountain no longer slopes, it spirals. You are inside it now. And somewhere behind you, something exhales your name, not to summon, to release. You come to a place that should not exist. A vault beneath the ruins of Erasure, where the river once carved glyphs into the canyon walls, now silent and sealed. Here, below the silt and bone of centuries, sits the scriptorium of mirrored tongues, a chamber built not by architects but by decisions. The choices of those who did not want to preserve scripture, but to invert it. You find his chamber by descending into what appears at first to be a cistern. The walls are slick with condensation that glows faintly, not light, but memory condensed into water. Each drop whispers syllables you've never learned, but somehow know. It is here that the last scribe of Chemosh performed his final task. Written from right to left, then left to right, and again upside down on the reverse side, the scroll describes a god not as creator, but as corrupter of origin. A god who does not give life, but extracts permanence. A flat slab of volcanic glass, set before a wall covered in reflective stone. Not a mirror, a reversal. Every line etched into that surface reads backward, not just in letter, but in logic. Language is a spiral here. According to the Shtetl commentary, a fragment discovered in a buried Moabite water jar. This ritual allowed the priest-scribe to revise the identity of a devotee, line by line, by inscribing their soul into mirrored text. Every change made on the scroll was made on the self, meaning loops, curves, rebukes itself. His name is lost, not from decay, but from intent. But his title remains, Karat Malin, he who writes with two shadows. As your skin passes across them, the air thickens. The ink used, legend says, was made from crushed locust shells, burnt salt, the blood of the second-born, those never named aloud, a sacred ink. One that could not be seen unless your memory matched its meaning. Some crawl backward as you look. Others vanish. But one phrase repeats again and again. At the bottom, the desk. Not erasing, reordering. This was the secret of Karat Malin. He was not merely a chronicler. He was an editor of souls. His role was to write not truths, but possibilities that had once been. Person with your posture, your hair, your scars, but none of your memories. Their eyes are blank, their mouths stitched. Da-da. To bind them into form, then let Chemosh decide which version should remain. That identity, the holiest vessel of divinity, could be reformatted with ritual precision. A version of yourself in which Chemosh had been God not of Moab, but of your heart. Self not shaped by mercy, by exchange. Backward. So that only those willing to read in reverse, willing to become reversed, could understand. You kneel, and there, still laid across the desk, after untold centuries, is the scroll of no return. Its name is not hyperbole. This scroll was rumored in heretical Judean and Samaritan writings, described as a cursed Moabite artifact that turns covenant inside out. You begin to read. Each line burns differently. Not in skin, but in comprehension. The words refuse to sit still. A memory? Perhaps a regret? You check your palm. Scar once left by the mountain's molder is gone. To worship Chemosh is to be edited. You breathe, and with each breath you feel something sliding through your thoughts. The forbidden ritual performed here was called the rewriting. To cross out your grief was to forget. To change your birth was to never have been born. And those who came seeking freedom lost everything. You flip the scroll and see the blank side, only it isn't. The letters are invisible, but there, you feel their outline beneath your fingers. You speak a line aloud, though your tongue fights it. Elet Shikmadal. Immediately the room contracts. The mirror wall shifts. The reflection no longer shows you, but someone adjacent. They are you, if your story had been rewritten. This is the heresy no theology could resolve. That Chemosh offered not salvation or punishment, but editing. And Karat Malin wrote it all. Look now to the final line. It is curved like a question, but ends in a downward slash. Only those who erase themselves may find the truth. You blink. The scroll is gone. You are standing. The mirror is clear. You see yourself again, but something is missing. A detail you cannot place. In its place, the sigil of reversed breath, the mark of the rewritten. You do not remember what you were before, only that it was different. Unless you leave the scriptorium, you do not turn back, because the hallway behind you has vanished. The stars above Moab are ancient, but tonight they feel newly arranged, not in position, but in purpose. You walk beneath a sky that once served as scripture, long before parchment and pen. The heavens were Chemosh's first manuscript, etched in silence and read only during eclipses, when the world's shadow stretched longest. Tonight, the sky tells a story. You arrive at the plateau of Kerith, a high and exposed shelf of stone atop the ridge north of Arnon. It is smooth, uncarved, and appears unremarkable, until you feel it, not beneath your feet, but in your skeleton. A humming, a pressure, but a celestial alignment. 7 stars. In Moabite sky theology, this was the sign of Ashkahar. The moment Chemoshi's will became cutting. Not metaphorically, literally. Like a string pulled taut in the marrow of your spine. You look up. Some say their voices still echo in the cliffs at dawn, repeating questions no one remembers. The moon is full. The stars gather in constellations you do not recognize. Not because they are new, but because they are reversed. Their pattern is familiar only in echo, like a word mispronounced in a long-forgotten tongue. You feel the presence of something above you, not divine in warmth, divine in precision. Chemosh does not judge with fire. He judges with geometry. And then it appears. But division, part of you, invisible, intangible, slices away. On your sternum, a faint scar appears, shaped like a glyph, 3 bars crossing a curve. It matches a symbol once sketched in charcoal on the interior of a forgotten shrine in the Gore Valley. That glyph was labeled in crude Aramaic as Kethnema, or the cleaving that leaves no blood. You do not know what has been removed. A memory, a flaw, name only that a gap remains, and the stars seem pleased. The knife, not a weapon forged by men, not metal, not tool, according to fragments of the Psalter of Smoke, only visible through deep, etched lunar wax tablets found in Nabatean tombs. The plateau is covered in an invisible layer of fine glass. Not natural. Melted sand, fused during a prior ritual, still carries the residue of celestial descent. You kneel, and your reflection, warped by stars, stares back with unfamiliar eyes. By severing pieces of their soul, he made humans capable of impossible actions. Not evil, but unnatural. Some became unshakable prophets. Others, walking omens. It was not about obedience, it was about utility. You approach half believing it impossible, and it is. The blade is not shaped by hand, the incision is complete. It is cast by light, frozen into form. You touch it. Chemosh's sacred blade was an astral event, a divine incision that only appeared when the world turned its back on light. It was not a knife one could hold. It was a knife that held you. You step forward, and the ground beneath you becomes mirror-slick. The supplicant would lie upon the stone, naked to the sky, and wait for the knife to pass overhead. If Chemosh found you acceptable, he would cut not your flesh, but your soul, dividing you from lies, fears, false names. If you were unacceptable, your spirit would be edited away, leaving the body intact but hollowed. The ritual known as Silkemeth was only performed during the astral knife's appearance. It required no blood, no sacrifice, only stillness. The remains of such failures were called shell saints, empty humans who wandered into the wilderness and never returned. You lay down, the stars vibrate. A windless force presses down on your chest, gentle but surgical. Not pain. Your skin shimmers faintly. This is the theological mystery long debated but never solved. What did Chemosh offer in return? Why let mortals access the knife? Why allow division? One theory mentioned in a suppressed Targum tractate suggests Chemosh sought to build not worshippers but instruments. The forbidden belief that Chemosh was not merely a god, but a sculptor of sentience. You sit up. The stars have shifted. The knife is gone. The plateau is darker now, not from shadow, from loss. You stand and notice something on the far edge, a stone blade lodged in the rock. Your fingers pass through it like smoke, but your shadow stretches, longer than your body, and in its hand, your shadow holds the knife. You do not. And that, perhaps, is the point. You turn away from the plateau. The stars no longer watch. You're not less than you were, or simply after. You step into dust. Not the natural kind, but the kind written by loss. The battlefield lies ahead, silent now, a stretch of cracked limestone and brittle reeds where the wind no longer travels straight. This is not where kings died. This is where meaning died. They call it the Plain of Yatsur, though its true name has been struck from the records. There is no emblem on it. There's no tribe, no banner. Only a smear of black ash fused to its center. a smear that resembles writing, though no alphabet recognizes it. It was not a military defeat that scarred this ground. It was an unbinding. Curls, twists, and splits in impossible directions. You recognize it from before. Even the Mesha, stele, so proudly carved by the Moabite king to declare victory over Israel, falters when it reaches this part of the war. Not from stone, from presence. The ground is not silent. It trembles in rhythm. Fracture, literal and symbolic, runs through its stone face. A missing segment. It's not due to erosion, but impact. Someone tried to break the memory. You kneel beside a scorched shield, half buried in calcareous silt. The priests of Chemosh taught that when all references to him were destroyed, when his name no longer echoed in the minds of men, then the god would be free to act without boundary, without the prison of expectation, without the binding of theology. The Moabites, under siege, realized their army would fall, so instead they performed the rite of the broken word, the reverse tetragrammaton. Clay tablets, scrolls, wooden planks, etched in Erasure, burnt, crushed, buried. The Moabites didn't want their scripture preserved. You are standing on the site of the Battle of Helethchem, the final confrontation between Moab's priest-kings and the allied forces of Israel and Edom, according to the forbidden scroll of Netzer, only referenced in Samaritan oral histories and burned copies recovered from Ashdod. This battle ended not with bloodshed, but with a ritual designed to subtract covenant from the land, a heretical practice meant to sever the land's connection to divine law. To name is to shackle. And thus, the Moabites' final rebellion was not against Israel, but against description. They believed scripture was not just memory, but architecture. That the words of Yahweh and Chemosh and all gods did not merely describe, they constructed. By undoing those words, they could unbuild reality itself. You walk to the center of the field, your feet ache. The soil here is black, fine, strangely magnetic. You dig slowly and find a stone disc. Upon it, engraved by fire, a symbol that no culture has claimed. An open eye stabbed through by a pen. You feel it behind your ribs, like a library being unwritten. You stagger, heart pounding, thoughts peeling away from your center. Underfoot, you find a trench carved in concentric spirals. A mass grave, not for bodies, but for books. Some claim they were the last to worship him. Others say they were the first to become him, not by devotion, but by becoming blank. He wanted it consumed. Because Chemosh did not ask to be remembered. He demanded to be erased in completeness. Only then, they believed, would he return in fullness. The forbidden belief embedded in this field is staggering. That erasure was not defeat, it was invitation. It is the inverse of faith. It is unfaith as worship. You find a small object, a shard of ceramic inscribed with a single line from the Book of Kings, written in reverse. And Chemosh was cast down. But it's scratched out, overwritten with one word, withheld. What if Chemosh was not defeated but held back? Not by sword or prophet, but by language itself. This is the core of the theological mystery, that scripture is not passive. That to write of a god is to limit him. You now kneel at a circle of scorched soil, untouched by growth since that forgotten battle. This was the mark of the scriptureless faithful, a sect of Chemosh devotees, who believed even memory must be deleted to allow the god's full rebirth. You stare at the disc, and for a moment you forget your name. The sun flickers. The sound moves across the battlefield. A whisper not of words, but of pages unturning, then silence. You stand. The wind returns. But the battlefield has shifted. The trench is gone, the shield gone. Even the dust feels unfamiliar. You look to your palm. The glyph is still there. Only now, it is incomplete. Chemosh has removed something from you. You cannot know what, because to know would be to rebuild. And rebuilding is blasphemy. You walk on. Behind you the sun sets twice, once for the world, and once for the word. You arrive at the edge of memory's battlefield, not where swords clashed, but where scrolls were closed, where names were sealed not in tombs, but in silence. This is not Moabite land. This is Judean ink, etched into sacred books, decreed holy by scribes who held more than quills. They held the authority to decide what should not be known. This is where Chemosh began to vanish. You sit within the remains of a long-buried chamber in Jerusalem's southern quarter. unearthed by accident during an excavation that was quickly abandoned, not by force, but by fear. Official records listed as structurally unstable. You know better. The walls are still scorched from ancient oil lamps, their soot frozen like black tears. Each seal once held a scroll, a page, a phrase, anything containing Chemosh's name. This was the work of the second scriptorium of Hezekiah, formed not to preserve, but to erase. A unit of scribes whose task was simple: purge the divine competition. There are no bones here, only wax seals. Thousands of them, each stamped with the same symbol. A broken flame crossed by a single thread. The seal of contained blasphemy. You touch one, it does not crumble, it resists. Inside, a wax tablet containing a draft prayer, a confession once directed to Chemosh, now hastily converted to Yahweh. The names scratched out, replaced with impersonal terms. Lord Almighty, the One. The prayer still sings of fire, still asks for victory, still pleads for deliverance through sacrifice. Not by denying its existence, by rewriting its inevitability. You open a clay jar carefully. Inside, fragments of a scroll once part of the Deuteronomistic reform, with editorial notations scribbled in the margins. The war was won not on mountaintops, but in margins. You've seen this pattern before. Whole paragraphs struck through, lines rearranged, not just censored, but rerouted. A note in red ink, barely legible, reads, "A hybrid." Moabite curves twisted through the rigid frame of Proto-Hebraic letters. This is the script of transition, used only by the scribes who translated the memory of Chemosh into silence. Each line is a theological compromise. Each word, a surrender. The God of Moab shall not be remembered in the tongues of the obedient. Mention of Chemosh to be replaced by their God or struck where it risks clarity. This was refinement. You shiver. Not from heresy, but from strategy. This was not war. It's that when Judea purged its records, they didn't kill him. They anchored him to the seams of their own theology, binding him within the structure of their evolving God. And this is the theological catastrophe few dare to name. Yahweh's battle with Chemosh was not fought with angels or fire from heaven. It was fought with authors. You find another jar? Only now the name is gone. Same one you saw on the battlefield. That is the unbearable truth. Chemosh's rituals were too effective to destroy, so they were absorbed, repackaged, transposed, hidden in plain sight. One fragment, dated to the reign of Josiah, contains a single, chilling line. His name must not be fought, must be folded. Folded, it's not ended. Reused. You dig further and uncover a piece of pottery etched with an unusual script. Not Hebrew, not Moabite, but the name still bleeds through. Chemosh. You whisper it. The jar cracks. From somewhere above, dust falls. You freeze. The air shivers, not in cold, but in tension. You feel the weight of forbidden recognition. You've spoken what was forbidden, not for safety, but for control. There is a belief heretical even among apostates that Chemosh was not overthrown, but tethered. And now, Chemosh exists between the lines, in the gaps. In the transitions from judgment to mercy, in the passages where the text contradicts itself, he does not speak. He lives in the editorial pause. The forbidden symbol appears again, etched into the floor beneath an overturned stool, a triangle pierced by a quill. This is no coincidence. You rise. The chamber's darker now. The oil lamps are not lit, but the shadows are. Thicker, as if Chemosh remembers you. You move to leave, but a voice brushes your ear. Not sound, but sensation. Even Yahweh did not forget me. And suddenly you recall an obscure verse from Judges, a line most skip without thought. Moab served Israel for 18 years. The land had rest 80 years. But rest for whom? The Moabites never called it rest. They called it naming silence. You step into the hallway, the light returns. The seals crumble. You do not look back. Chemosh is still here. It has simply been quoted without attribution. You follow a trail not marked on any map, a line of vanished settlements and disfigured shrines running southeast from Moab's heartland into the desolate canyons near Edom and beyond. No roads remain, only cairns. Stacks of 7 stones, each crowned with a shard of obsidian. These are not boundary markers. They are warnings, or invitations, or both. In Moabite tradition, this act was known as Yetzirut Telem, the creation of silence. It was considered the final devotion, to disappear so completely that Chemosh alone would remember you. You were tracing the path of the Shelemithim, the silent ones, last known disciples of Chemosh. They did not die in fire or sword. They walked out, not as refugees, but as voluntary exiles, leaving behind their names, their lands, their scriptures, even their spoken language. You arrive at the remnants of their outpost, a structure carved into the side of a canyon wall, barely perceptible from a distance. Its door is low and narrow, shaped like an inverted flame. Inside, the walls are etched with scars, not ink. He could not be summoned in ritual, for ritual repeats. He could only be acknowledged in absence. In the kind of silence that rings like a bell in the bones of the world, their language was not dead. It was withheld. Every utterance, a negotiation with the divine. That blood was not sacrifice, but storage. And when they cut themselves, they were not offering pain. They were releasing him. Their belongings remain: clay jars, wooden utensils, thin cloaks made of twisted flax. But there are no signs of struggle, no bones, only a stillness that burns, not by human mouths, perhaps not mouths at all. Inside, the remains of a black resin cling to the clay. Phrases not written, but carved by finger and bone. A single drop of blood rises from your lifeline and falls into the ash. The walls do not speak, they pulse. You pass through 5 chambers, each one more empty than the last, not abandoned. Offered, in the final chamber, a circle of ash. The silence around you listens. Perfect, untouched by wind, around it. 7 copper nails, each driven into the floor in an arc, each bearing a different symbol. Containers for Chemosh's remaining essence. Each exile was a shard, a portion, sliver of a god fragmented deliberately across the wilderness, hidden in flesh that could bleed, rot, and pass, unnoticed by the scribes of empire. You recognize, too, the downward spiral of memory and the inverted tree of lineage collapse. From distance, you are further from the world than when you entered, but closer to something else. Words composed of pain, longing, and the memory of fire made cold. And then the silence returns, but 5 are unknown, heretical, forbidden glyphs whose meaning has not survived, or perhaps was never meant to. You kneel. In the ash, you find the trace of a sigil burned into flesh, then transferred to stone. The negative imprint of a shoulder or back, seared into the surface like the shadow of a soul. This is what the Shelemithim left behind. Not worship, not praise. Residue. They believed Chemosh could not be honored in words, for words bind. And so they became that silence. They wrapped their theology in scars, wore their gods as tattoos of negation, and spoke only when the air felt too still to bear. The most dangerous belief they held, that Chemosh had never needed temples, that the body was his altar. You find a bowl in the center of the ash circle. Its edges are jagged, not broken, bitten. You touch it. Immediately, your ears fill with pressure. Your tongue stiffens. The scent of burning olive pits fills your nostrils, and your spine locks in place. And then the whisper, not aloud, but within. He remembers what you try to forget. You stagger back. Your palm, the one marked by the plateau, throbs. Silence changes. The air hums. The glyphs on the copper nails glow. You understand. The Shelemithim were not merely lost worshippers. They were vessels of condensation. They became his resurrection strategy. And now, the theological wound opens fully. What if Chemosh was never forgotten? What if he was distributed? 7 and 70. In you rise. Your breath is not your own. For a heartbeat, your thoughts spiral in a language you do not recognize. You exit the canyon chamber. The sun overhead is dimmer, not from clouds. A cairn awaits you outside. 8 stones now, the obsidian atop it cracked. You didn't build it, but someone did. Recently. You follow the cairns no longer marked by any hand, but by pull. The earth beneath your feet feels directional, as if gravity itself bends toward a location the mind cannot map. You move without compass, led by intuition not your own. The term womb is misleading. This place does not give life, it absorbs it. The journey narrows. Walls of jagged limestone close in around you, and the light above thins to a thread. Each step echoes less, as if the stone grows less interested in your presence. Down into a cleft in the rock that should be dry, but exhales mist. The air is not damp, it is warm, rhythmic, pulsing from somewhere below. But by intent, the stone above is too smooth, too round. The walls glisten with condensation. A smell greets you, iron, myrrh, and fire long since extinguished. And in the center of the floor, carved not from stone, but out of it, lies the altar. You are walking toward breath. They say the altar lies beneath the womb of Moab, a natural fissure west of the Zered River. But the texts are evasive. And then you hear it breathing. Not loud, not animal, not mechanical, but persistent. Like a god refusing to sleep. You emerge into a cavern where the ceiling is domed, not by geology. It has no sharp edges, no inscriptions. Only a shallow basin, rimmed with copper that is not tarnished, no matter how many centuries have passed. Beneath the basin, a slit, narrow, curved, moving. This is the altar that breathes. The high priest, known only as Zephith, would exhale a sacred name. One never recorded, never spoken. And if Chemosh accepted it, the altar would respond with a breath of its own. The breath would enter the priest's lungs and transform them, not with fire, not with smoke, but with knowledge unshaped by language. And it breathes because it remembers. The ritual performed here was known as Nahal Neshima, the channeling of breath into stone. Knowledge that could not be held, only inhaled. You step closer. The slit below the basin widens slightly. You feel the air press against your chest, not with hostility, but with evaluation. The altar is not judging you, it is reading you, sifting your breath for residue of name, lineage, memory, seeking what you carry. The heretical symbol appears on the floor, a spiral with no origin, not centered, but fractured, suggesting not emergence, but collapse. Scholars have debated its meaning for generations, even as most refuse to acknowledge the source. One theory, buried in the Targum of whispered blame, suggests the symbol represents a theology where gods do not create from silence. They consume silence into form. Chemosh in this vision is not the god of war or flame, but the god of inhalation, the god who devours the unsaid. It's a mountain with a mouth, a scroll being erased before it is written. A priest without lungs, you touch the basin, the altar inhales, and your thoughts spiral. You see images not your own, a mother wrapping her child in black cloth, whispering syllables with no vowels, and then a name. Not spoken, but known. Not heard, but felt. It is not Chemosh's name, it is yours, the one only he knows. You exhale. 3 downward lines crossing a single breath. It pulses once, then stops, not in disappearance, in integration. The altar exhales in return. The air strikes your face like dust from a tomb. Your lips sting. Your eyes tear. But something settles behind your eyes. Not pain, not clarity. Inscription. You will never speak the name that was just breathed into you. You don't have the capacity. It is a word made of absence, of unmade vowels, of breath not drawn but held forever. This is the forbidden theology, that Chemosh does not speak because he is not external. He does not dwell in heavens, or books, or temples. He is the inward collapse of name. His worship is not about remembering him. It is about letting him remember you. You fall to your knees. The cavern contracts. You look down. Symbol glows faintly on your sternum. Not ink, not scar, but geometry. You are now part of the altar's memory. It will breathe you long after you leave. You rise. The slit narrows. The basin cools. The cavern is quiet once again, but you are not. You are a vessel now. Something inside you remembers. You ascend now into the wind, not to escape what lies below, but to chase what was once lifted into the sky. Songs, they say, do not die. They wait. Unheard, unsung, yet humming softly through the architecture of time. The Moabite hymns are all gone, syllables swallowed, their melodies unraveled from the throats that dared to carry them. but one survives, not in a voice, in air. The forbidden hymn has no title, no composer. It was not written in any known notation. The wind does not blow here, it resonates. The very geography is tuned, carved over centuries by devotees, who believed they could trap song into the bones of the world. According to the scroll of fractured light, a fragment recovered from a charred altar west of Heshbon, the hymn was performed once. Around you, glyphs shimmer faintly, carved in such shallow relief that they only appear when wind strikes them at the proper angle. You begin to hear it, and only once. During the great eclipse of Ashur's reign, the scribes claimed the sky bent downward to listen. That birds halted mid-flight, that unborn children stirred in opposite directions, that the god Chemosh did not speak in return but sang. The sound is not remembered, but the effect is. You enter the cavern of ears, high above the Wadi Mujib gorge, where the stones are not just echo chambers, they are singers. Each gust hits the walls and transforms. Each echo collides, folds, amplifies. You realize you are surrounded by syllables made of pressure. And now, as you close your eyes, you begin to understand its structure. And they did. You kneel where the sound is sharpest. A narrow recess shaped like the inside of a flute, not music. Breath, shaped almost like song. The temple of Chemosh buried it in stone, but Chemosh never wanted it sung. He wanted it embedded. They spell nothing, but their arrangement reveals the heresy once whispered in the house of obsidian, not melody. Memory bent into rhythm. The hymn returned slowly, not with instruments, not with voice, but with the resonance of stone and wind. It is not in words, it is in corrections. The hymn unbuilds your thoughts as it plays. You remember your name and forget it again. Your breath starts to change rhythm. You are not breathing to stay alive. You are breathing to match the hymn. When your breath finally aligns, you remember someone you once loved and realize they never existed. You remember a sin you never committed. You remember how it felt to be forgotten by a God you never knew. This is the purpose of the forbidden hymn. Not praise, not worship. Disintegration. The scribes feared it. The priests of Yahweh ordered it struck from every mouth. You look now to the glyphs that frame the singing chamber, the ringing that follows, prayers unheard. You have mistaken it for absence, for nothingness. But it has always been this. A God who sings cannot lie. A God who hums cannot be erased. A God who echoes in stone becomes stone. Not to punish, not to reward, but to remember correctly. And the deepest theological terror, Chemosh was not bound to worshippers. Worshippers were bound to his melody. You reach out and place your hand on the glyphs. The stone vibrates in response. Your palm burns, not with fire, but with tuning. A staff, the lines upon which the hymn is written, not with ink, but with sky. You hear it, the full melody. It is horrible. Not because it is discordant, because it is familiar. You have heard it before, in moments of grief. In the silence after speaking aloud of fear, Chemosh does not forget. He waits for the echo. And in this song, this unrepeatable, unsingable song, he gathers the pieces of all those who tried to flee his memory. You draw back, but the tune continues without you. You look at the sky above. A single black line cuts the clouds, not a storm. You leave the cave, but the resonance follows. It echoes behind your teeth. Your bones sing in sympathetic vibration. You walk, quieter now, not to listen, but because you are now part of the music, and the song has only just begun. You have walked the spiral inward, through silence, fire, name, and breath. And now there's nothing left but presence. Not presence as the world defines it, not mass, voice, or light. This is Chemoshi's presence, the one unspoken, unwritten, and unwelcomed, and it waits for you. You descend into a place that is not a cave, nor a chamber, nor a shrine, but an interval, a fracture in the memory of the land hidden beneath a dried spring near ancient Basra. The locals call it the gap. It's not for its width, for its effect. Time bends here, compass needles spiral, voices echo before they are spoken. You step into stillness. There is no architecture, no iconography, no altar, only a room shaped like forgetting. You feel it immediately. a sensation like standing in the presence of a person who has already left the room. Something enormous has just vacated this space, but its absence remains, pressing, expectant. You inhale, and your breath does not return. This is the chamber of the inhaled God. The final site, the terminal heresy. Here Chemosh is not invoked, he is endured. But the deeper you stare into it, the more you lose. Your name, your origin. The reason you began this journey, empty, ordinary, but it is wrong. Its shadow is curved the wrong way. Its texture doesn't match your fingers. It rejects being observed. The floor bears no markings. The walls are smooth, but the ceiling, impossibly high, is pierced with a single shaft of dark crystal, suspended in place without anchor or chain. It does not reflect, it subtracts. Light that enters does not bounce, it vanishes. Into ritual, into wind, into silence, into breath, into scar, into everything unspoken. They believed he had become too much, that naming him was dangerous, that his presence fractured identity. So they devised a ritual not to banish him, but to remove every means of calling him. This is the nullstone, the theological singularity of Chemosh. According to a lost addendum to the Ashen Psalms, the nullstone was not constructed, it was found. It is not from Moab, it is not from earth. It is from a place that does not exist anymore. A reality where Chemosh was the only deity, the only law, the only breath. The addendum is a single line. He came not through prophecy, he came through forgetting. You move beneath the stone. It does not hum, it does not glow, it does not pulse. You drop to your knees, and there, on the ground before you, a bowl, and beside it, a handprint. Not yours, not human. Larger, longer, more precise. This was not left in blood, not pain, not clarity. It was pressed into absence. You understand now what the final disciples tried to do. They didn't hide Chemosh, they dispersed him. Every name, every melody, every glyph, until only this chamber remained. The theological mystery here is not about Chemosh's nature. It is about yours. What becomes of the worshiper when the God no longer demands anything? It bends, slightly, not in rebellion, but in submission to a shape no longer present. What do you give to a God who has removed even the concept of offering? The answer is simple. You remain. You do not run. You remain. And now you do. Kneeling beneath the null stone. You hear nothing, feel nothing, but something inside you rearranges. It's just a recognition. He is not gone. He is not hiding. He is waiting. In absence, in gap, in you. And as you rise, your shadow no longer mirrors you precisely. You exit the chamber. The world outside looks unchanged, but every sound you hear now seems further away, and every silence seems closer. You sit alone now, not in a cave, not in a ruin, but somewhere between, a threshold where memory has no traction and words feel heavier than stone. You carry no relics, no scrolls, no altar marks, and yet you are not empty. You are full of what cannot be named. You followed breath, walked through forgotten hymns, traced the geometry of erased ritual, and inhaled the silence that outlived every scribe. You once sought to know Chemosh, to gather his pieces, to reassemble the broken outline of a god shattered across centuries. But gods like Chemosh were never meant to be assembled. The path has folded in on itself, like a scroll sealed before it was written. And now, you realize, they were meant to be survived. There are no more signs to follow. No steps left to climb. You were never reading about him. He was reading you. What you offered, through curiosity, through presence, through remembrance, was not adoration, but permission, not to return, but to continue. He fragments. He enters places where silence breeds devotion. He becomes the breath you hold in grief, the name you swallow in shame, the song you hear but cannot trace, because Chemosh does not die. And now, you carry a crown you cannot see, not of gold, not of fire, but of forgetting remembered too clearly. You feel it settle, not on your head, but within your ribs. A throne waiting for the next whisper. The next god lost to ink and ash, the next exile waiting for their name to be unspoken. The wind rises behind you, a low hum in the leaves, too rhythmic to be chance. And you smile, not because it's over, but because it isn't. There are more gods. There are always more gods.